Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this important session today. My name is Fahad Hussain. I'm a program coordinator at the International Center for Climate Change and Development. I coordinate the LUC program, which stands for the LDC University's Consortium on Climate Change. This is an official capacity building initiative of the LDC group, housed at ECAT. So currently we have 19 university members from 19 countries. The objective of the consortium is to build in-country capacity in LDCs so that LDCs are able to build capacity. LDCs are able to deal with climate change on their own without having to rely on the external consultants. So before we delve into the presentations, I would like to provide a brief description of the project which funded the works that will be presented today. The works have been done under the project called Co-Creating Knowledge for Local Adaptation in the Least Developed Countries, in partnership with the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, NMBU, and 3 other universities from Mozambique, Nepal, and Uganda, and IUB, the Independent University Bangladesh, being the Bangladesh partner of the project. Also, as a LAG project, we coordinate the overall project. So the project aims to enhance community-based adaptation, education, and research in LDCs. This is funded by the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, NORAD, which seeks to build the capacity of universities in LDCs for community-based adaptation, education, and research. This particular project is a part of NORAD's program for capacity development in higher education and research for development, known as NORHED, which focuses on strengthening the capacity for higher education institutions in developing countries to produce high quality graduates, conduct more and high quality research, and achieve more inclusive higher education. The project was designed to contribute to the goals of the LAC, which I mentioned earlier. This includes fostering South-South collaboration, working with the most vulnerable communities to promote collaborative learning and capacity building. Our gathering today highlights the dedication and hard work of our researchers who have been actively engaged in this endeavor. As a part of the project, we fund 4 students each year to do research on CBA, and these 3 students are part of that. All 3 of them are recent graduates of Climate Change and Development Program at IUB, and now they're continuing with their work. And Manjul Bhai, as you can see, has started his PhD in Canada. So without any further ado, let's move to the presentations. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our first presenter, M. Munjul Islam, who is doing a PhD in geography at the University of Guelph, Canada. He will be presenting the state of locally led adaptation in climate vulnerable communities in selected coastal districts of Bangladesh. Manjul Bhai, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fahad Bhai. Sharing my screen. Am I audible?
Yes, loud and clear.
Can you see my presentation in the
Yes.
conference? Okay, thank you. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and thank you, people joining around the world. So today I'm going to present my MSc thesis findings from which I got funded by local scholarship. My research title was The State of Locally Led Adaptation in Climate Vulnerable Community in Selected Coastal District of Bangladesh. Here is my presentation outline. I will focus on following area in my presentation. Bangladesh southwest coastline territory is one of the most disaster-prone place in the world and suffering both slow onset and sudden calamities. And particularly, I choose two districts for my study. Khulna and Bagherat are the most exposed in the region, and both districts are impacted by the climate change, forms of rapid onset disaster and other extreme incidents. And in order to meet the difficulties of climate change, government of Bangladesh and NGOs have undertaken variety of national programs to deal with these changes and focusing on NAPA and BCC and MCPP. And this strategy actually have some sort of bottlenecks. This strategy is hardly address the local context rather than a specific issue, and not completely capable what contextualize the local vulnerability. So it is actually equally crucial to note that the adaptation at the local and community level cannot be taken in place by isolation. The propensity of the neglecting local reality and contextual subtles is the well-documented contributing factor to the poor growth in the local scale. And it has been evident that sort of CV and other community-based strategies have made a real effort to better incorporate the local environment, but there is still over-reliance on external resource and an external support. And locally driven efforts have several flaws that makes the adaptation process weaker less than the successful. So my research aim was capture the local experience from the local government and non-governmental organization expert, and as well as local actors and community people's desire of successful implementation of climate change related project by incorporating LLA component. So here is my research objective. So first objective, focus on the review existing government and non-government initiative, focusing on the community-based adaptation and local adaptation. And second one is to gain understand the knowledge, experience, and expectation local actors, community representative about the implementation of LLA initiatives or projects. And last one is to identify the practice and expectation of climate vulnerable communities, people to execute local action for climate resilient community. To addressing three objective, I actually focus on 5 research questions. Of my first question was, what is the understood by the LLA by all stakeholders, including local authority, practitioner, and community? And do the government and non-government climate change related initiatives sufficiently address and implement the adaptation project, which have key element of LLA? Third one is how adaptation project designed and implemented at local level, and are there any input included from the local level, and what is the decision-making process? Fourth one is, does community actors and leaders are responsive for adaptation process? Are they interested in LLA process to make community more climate resilient? And last one was about what are the challenges locally led adaptation for climate resilient community in the coastal communities. For my study, actually, I choose 2 districts, Bagherat and Khulna. So from Bagherat, I choose 2 most vulnerable upazila, Paikgacha and Koira. And from Bagherat district, I choose Morulganj upazila for my study. So altogether, I choose 3 upazila from respective districts. So predominantly my research method was mostly qualitative approach was employed extensively, but in some but some reason I have applied some quantitative research technique to analysis and come from the statistical analysis, and secondary review method also adopted here. And in my study, I actually collected data from the government and non-government climate change adaptation project and initiative with and I also talked with the representative from the this organization, as well as I also collected data from the community people. So here is the sampling strategy for the different information collection. For first section, it's about selecting the project. So I particularly choose 2 projects from each upazila, and one project was for a government initiative and another is for the NGO initiative. So altogether, I actually analyzed 6 projects. And I also collected information from the project representative. So I performed a KII from each project. I actually collected information by the project representative. So altogether, I conducted 3 KII. And for collecting information from the community level, I actually conducted 6 FGD, which actually done in the union level. And each upazila, I conducted 2 FGD. And I also collected information from the community representative. So I conducted 3 KII from the each upazila. Altogether, I conducted 9 KIIs. So most of the primary data actually come from the FGD and in-depth review and KII, and I also utilize secondary resources and other data for supplement my primary findings. And mostly I applied different type of tools and guidelines. First one was about the project profiling. So I prepared a checklist and guideline on that to collecting this information. And I also applied the different quality method. So I prepared FGD guideline and KI guideline to collect this information, and my fieldwork was conducted mid of August 2020 and completed by October 2020. And as I mentioned earlier, as it was mostly dependent on qualitative method, so I actually transcribe and categorize the data to present in narrative format. And in some extent, I actually utilize Microsoft Excel and MS Word for the analysis and representation of my research data. So now I will move into research findings. So first of all, I would like to present the indicator analysis. This profile actually prepared based on the 9 indicators, which actually I developed based on the sort of secondary information as well as my analysis. So based on that, I weighted this analysis in different categories for based on the LLA priorities. So first of all, I said a scale for the each category. So the lower scale is about the 1 and it's not a priority for the LLA, and highest scale determine the 5, which is very essential for the LLA component. And to analyze this and understand the overall process, it further weighted by the low, moderate, and high category. So if any project score between 1 and 15, I mark those as a low category. And if anyone scores 16 to 30, it's show as a moderate, and above 30 is a high. So in this analysis, actually the most of the NGOs initiative are belong to high category, as they have more component. They are more promising to implement the LLA initiative rather than the government. And though government initiative are fall into the moderate category, but those are very close to the lower score. So in this sense, we can say that like GOB projects are performing bit low rather than the NGO initiative. So as my research question focus on the defining the LLA by community, so most of them could not clearly define the term, but they attempt to define LLA, which was significant because they connect in their current initiative from the local level. So they actually realize their context, that what is locally led adaptation mean to them, but it's they actually mix with the CBA concept. So sometimes it's not clear what actually they mean by the locally led adaptation. And from the community, the most respondents actually lack of comprehensive and clear understanding of locally led adaptation, because it actually new discourse, so they are not fully aware of this concept. So this was the challenging to defining LLA by their context. And local actor and community leaders mainly emphasize, actually they mention about the floods and waterlogging, saline water and shortage of fresh water, river erosion and land erosion and other sort of initiative they actually categorize under the LLA. So one of the NGO representative argued that the term LLA refers to the ability to adapt and to live with the climate-related challenges that are represented in the marginal region and limited level of impact for people of the outside. And I also explore for their participation in the project and their decision-making process. So committee member had a little understood of the design process of any initiative and project, and they attended meeting to provide design input during the design phase. In terms of decision-making process, they actually barely their opinion barely considered for the selecting beneficiary and the community initiative. And local actors do not have the clear understanding of the design stage, and however they understand, they invited to the meeting of the any event and decision making process for position of authority in their community, but that also sometimes hindered by the local political and social context. And NGO have the chosen variety of people from the various background who are in the leadership position in the community for planning and decision making, but government projects do not invite them in the process. They do not promise from any central authority. So we also explore for the community actors' interest in the local adaptation process. Community people think that local actors are the vital member of their community who provide advantage to community without expecting anything in return. And local leaders significantly impact the community by participating in activities, encourage exchange of opinion, providing feedback to the group members. They are crucial position to adapt climate change because they are familiar with the challenges and requirement of the community. And NGO effort are mostly engaged in local actors, but geo initiative are not obligated to engage them in the project initiative. Political influence is challenged to engage the local actor. So monitoring evaluation is the key factor in the LLA process. So I also explored these issues. In the monitoring evaluation learning process, that a negligible position of community people are invited to monitoring the local initiative, and lack of capacity, community members do not have working knowledge of the monitoring and evaluation process, so it is not effective in the community level. Local leaders invited to involve in the occasional monitoring phase of the project, but this is not a practice that implemented regularly and carry out, but they do not have good understanding of evaluating and learning phase of the project. So one of the beneficiaries that the only monitoring is considered within our project strategy is a scope for evaluation. Learning has not been established since our plan does not involve it. And we carry out official monitoring to carry out the design phase, and there is no opportunity for the community to participate and joining in the monitoring with us. So it is actually a bit scenario of hindered to the access, the monitoring and evaluation process. And I also explore the disclosure of their project and financial information. So committee member refer the regular meeting as a source of project and financial updates. It is essential to remember that it is a not formal means to sharing the exchanging the information. They actually share the information during the meeting, not any written communication conducted in this regard. And very few local actors and leaders say that they had access to information about the project and its finances via meeting and reports. Particularly, government initiatives do not share the financial information with the community people. And project run by the non-government organization more open and sharing information about the project and people who are benefiting from the initiative, but government initiative actually regulated their rules and other things, so they are not actually obligated or not willing to share the financial information with the community. Through the research process, I identify the major barriers of implementing LLA at the local level. So first one is about the lack of collaboration with various government and agency. This is signal most critical challenge. A lack of financial assistance is the one of the most critical challenges is implemented. They face in adapting adaptation strategy driven by the LLA initiative. And third one is about the complexity of bureaucratic system, which take up a lot of their time and prevent them from putting an initiative into actions. And influence of the decision-making process due to low participation rate of women in this endeavor also the significant, and political influence also hinder the decision-making process. So it is actually exists as a problematic context. So one respondent response, like the matter in the question is primarily one of the financial sources. This is location does not involve the same level of administrative complexity as a LLN. Nevertheless, there are a problem in certain instances due to bureaucratic complexity and reluctance. So based on the primary information and the secondary evidence, I actually propose a framework to scaling up locally led adaptation. So firstly, I focus on enabling factor of locally led adaptation that actually consists of local level decision making, knowledge, experience, network on local level, and considering several risks and vulnerability. And it actually supporting elements of the LLA process. And for the adaptation process, actually it's combine of the planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, accountability. So this actually supporting to enable process of LLA and application of locally led principle as well. And some factors should be considered for the locally led adaptation. Broadly, the significance of local actions and barrier of the local adaptation action and current state of local action. So if significance of local action consider the past and knowledge and flexible and solution of benefit of growth of current growth and adaptation based on local reality and economic benefit. So it can create the opportunity of the locally led adaptation. And here listed several barriers like financial issue and the capacity building issue and prone governance. And if we want to scaling up LLA, we need to breaking this barrier in proper way. And current state of local action actually in some contexts doing well, and project-based, externally driven and short-term sector specific and limited coordination. So if we utilize the current learning into the process, so we can emphasize that how can we ensure the LLA, so it will contribute the scaling up locally led adaptation in a very effective way. But all over the process, we actually require the different sources of funds. So we need to collaboration between the international, national, and local level sources to make it happen very effective way. So based on the research, I recommended some action points that Locally led adaptation is gaining the relevance in mainly levels of government in Bangladesh and is being included national plans and policy. But still policy option for LLA are limited. The government should design and execute the LLA specific strategy and plan that would be more suitable for the LLA intervention. Then government implemented project are the most deficit in implementing project level monitoring and evaluation system. A robust monitoring and evaluation system is required for the locally led project to track the progress and ensure accountability and learning mechanism. Then at the local level, political influence, culture, and power dynamics affect climate change adaptation action. So impairing the implementation. So government should be develop a special regulation and local political dynamic and make LLA process autonomous. And since the climate change has disproportionately affect the man and woman, there should be a protocol to follow where local level women leaders may participate in the decision-making process in the LLA intervention. And as a local government entity, Union Parishad are significant actor in the LLA process. Their capacity to lead the LLA process should be strengthened through the capacity building initiative, and they should have access more funding, finance, and utilize the LLA initiative more effective way. And in the initiative to adapt climate change at the local level, there is a lack of coordination among the various actors. So as a consequence, it is not functioning well. So there need a level of coordination, collaboration among government organization and civil society organization at the local level. Then since the governance mechanism of the LLA is a significant problem, so a sound governance system need to be built into the local government system to ensure effective execution of LLA initiative with the appearance of form of corruption. And at the local level, adaptation project which need coordination between government and non-governmental organization should adopt a co-financing system that would ensure the efficient implementation of LLA at the grassroots level. And lastly, the project at the government that need lead at operated in such a way so adopt a decentralized and bottom-up approach. This would speed up the LLA project and make them more effective and functional in achieving the intended goals. Okay, so here is some photos of my field work during my research. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manjul Bhai, for your wonderful presentation. Now we will take a few minutes for taking questions from the audience. So please free to share your thoughts or ask questions to Manjul Bhai if you have any. Thank you so much. If anyone wants to ask a question or give a comment, please raise your hand or put it on the chat box. I don't see any hands or questions or comments on the chat box, so I'm taking it that we don't know. So there is a question from, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the name wrong. It's Mulamwa. Sorry, I can pronounce it. So she says it's a great presentation, and it's very interesting, and the insights are very interesting and practical. So the question is, would incentivizing LLA help to catalyze institutionalizing the movement on both the government and community actors? And is the negligible attention by the government deliberate or what? Manjul Bhai,
Yeah.
if you answer the
Okay.
question.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Actually, Government actually not reluctant, I think, but thing is that they actually, when develop any plan in our country context, they actually focus on holistic way. I mean, in broader level. So sometimes it's not intentionally, but I believe it's unintentionally they ignore the local reality and local context. So uh, it should be actually focus on the local reality and local context. That's why I propose a recommendation that they need to be implement sort of locally led adaptation rule and regulation or the strategies to implement the LLA. So there they can be develop uh, joint initiative with government and non-government organization, or they can jointly finance the locally led adaptation. In this way, they can support the LLA process, I think.
Thank you, Manjul bhai. I hope that answers your question. There is another question which is now the same person has a follow-up question, which is what motivated the conception of the projects by NGOs? Was it evidence from early warning systems or indigenous aspirations of the people? And there's another question, which is there any suitable recommendations you'd like to suggest from your study in the current context of LLA? I think it was answered in the last slide. So if you'd like to focus on the other question.
Okay. So actually, in my study, I didn't explore any early warning system or indigenous aspiration in the local context, but it can be explored further, I think, for the understanding the process. But NGO can play a crucial role, but NGO has to go back forward rather than supporting the community by directly, because we seen in the CBA process that community always depended on the external resource and an external influence. So that actually not really their local action or their own decision. Rather, they actually dependent on the external peoples through the NGO initiative. So I think locally adaptation should be governed by the local people, and they will be the key actor and taking the decision in the various aspects.
Thank you so much. I think thank you so much, Manjul bhai, for answering the questions. I think we cannot take any more questions in the interest of time. So moving forward to the next presentation, our next presenter is Ishrat Jahan. She is currently a research fellow at the Bragg James P. Grant School of Public Health. Her work centers around coordinating and conducting qualitative research and capacity building projects, currently focused on issues of gender justice, climate crisis, and curriculum development. And she holds a master's degree in climate change and development from IUB and was part of the 2022 cohort of the master's batch. And like other two presenters, she also received scholarship under the project. So Ishrat, over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I will start. My title is a mouthful, but basically what my thesis was on agency and adaptive responses. So I tried to understand what the role of individual and collective agency was among Dalit communities in shaping the responses to climate change in the Shatkhira area of Bangladesh. Before I move on to my research and how I did it and what the findings were, I just want to quickly take us through why I focused on agency and why specifically did I go into looking at the Dalit community's experiences. So we understand that agency is a very critical component of adaptation processes. You have scholars telling us that collective action, which is so critical to both, community-based adaptation processes or locally led adaptation, really shapes whether your processes are going to succeed or fail. And it's also a very major component of how scholars have defined or understood what motivates or empowers communities to take on adaptive practices. I understand agency through, of course, my literature review as motivation, empowerment, and cognition. So these very invisible and variable terms play out both in individual levels as well as collective levels of a locality. So it's pretty important to understand it if we want to understand how people make choices, despite varying levels of power that they have within our systems. And that can hopefully provide us some answers which make now locally led adaptation processes better, or it can also help us ask better questions about justice within our adaptation processes. And Dalit communities within the context of Bangladesh are known as low caste or communities outside the caste system, specifically within Hindu communities, but there's also a combination of Muslim Dalits as well. And given that they have reduced levels of powers due to these kinds of religious and ethnic notions and hierarchies, these communities are already made vulnerable within our current systems. What that leads to is when you're faced with climate change impacts, you're already at a space where you're experiencing more greater degrees of vulnerabilities in comparison to other communities. And you would obviously have more challenges to navigate those vulnerabilities. And I wanted to understand how, despite being understood as a vulnerable community, despite having that reduced scope of power, they're still making choices. They're still coping with the kinds of crises that they face. And basically, what does that tell us about the ways in which we can have better adaptation processes or make them more, make them more contextual to the kinds of differences in vulnerabilities that exist, even within climate vulnerable contexts of Bangladesh. So I had three very broad research questions. In order to understand the role of agency, I had to first ask, well, what are the responses of Dalit communities when they're faced with climate change impacts, whether they're slow onset or sudden onset, and then look into how they understand agency, or how these levels of motivation, sense of empowerment, their perceived sense of abilities play out in shaping those responses, and what might be the kinds of influencing factors which enable their agency to exercise power to make certain kinds of choices. I focused in the Tala area of Satkhira within Bangladesh. Satkhira is understood to be very climate vulnerable, given that it's in the southwest region of the country. You have a lot of waterlogging issues. The cyclones impact various areas of the district. And within Tala, there are a number of Dalit as well as indigenous communities. And I focus specifically on 4 who are understood as scheduled caste, or that is outside the caste system, or low caste communities. I won't go into my conceptual framework, but this is basically how I saw the ways in which they made choices and the ways in which their exercise of agency was related then to whether they coped with the kinds of climate crisis that they're facing, whether they were able to adapt, or whether they were able to, utilize or have a greater sense of collective agency, which helped them take transformative approaches to the impacts that they faced. I won't go too deeply into this, but while I used a mixed method approach, I mostly focused on the qualitative component, and I focused more on doing in-depth interviews and focus group discussions across the 4 Dalit communities. And in order to make, their sense of agency, or what I term as individual or collective agency, visible, I did a survey across, male and females within the 4 localities to understand what the kinds of motivation levels were, whether they took any collective actions, and whether they thought that collective actions resulted from their, collective sense of belief that they would be able to tackle climate change impacts. The kinds of impacts that face these communities, well, they were not, the impacts were not different, but the ways in which they were having to suffer, the kinds of suffering that was created due to their reduced power as a Dalit community in Tala is the problem here. So you have a lot of chronic weather events happening. There's a lot of heat waves, there's a lot of rainfall patterns are shifting, and that obviously impacts their livelihoods, and it impacts them a lot more because given that they have very low educational levels, they're either employed as agricultural labor, or many communities are fishermen communities. So they're directly impacted. Given that they had their positioning in their society was basically outside the society, they were deemed as communities who would have to live in remote areas. They wouldn't have access to public spaces. So while those kinds of caste-based inequities have improved more or less over the years, those kinds of concepts still persist, and the kinds of inequities that they faced then have an impact on their life even now. So given that they live in remote areas, they've been generationally dependent on natural resources. When natural resources are shrinking, as well as your livelihood and income is shrinking, it's getting very difficult for them to survive when neither can they depend on nature or the environment around them, depend on their local practices or their traditional occupations, which might have been fishing, would have been making handicrafts out of bamboos, would have been making organic oil, and you also have very limited opportunities to diversify your livelihoods. So that's creating a lot of impact on them. Because in the context of Tala, waterlogging has disproportionately impacted all communities, but the way in which the waterlogging was addressed in the post-disaster scenarios, a few years, I think at least 10 years ago, their areas were the ones who would receive aid the last, even if they could receive aid. Their areas would remain flooded for longer periods because there would not be enough action from local governments or their influential figures within that wider area who would take into account their suffering and help them. So that gives you a picture of why there's a disproportionate impact there. Given that, most of the community has to opt for coping as a response to these sufferings that they face. So coping occurs in terms of them opting to work as agricultural labor or temporarily migrating to urban areas of Khulna to work in the informal spaces that the city offers. Women have a bit more, because of gender inequalities and their limited options to work, they don't have a lot of options, but within the options that they have, they try and pool resources across the households that are there in their area. They would reduce their food intake so their families can have enough to eat, or they buy and sell off livestock, take loans, and basically that's how they keep coping. Because Tala area also has a lot of NGOs that are working heavily in livelihood diversification, and also climate change issues. Not many Dalit communities are a part of this because given that a lot of them are still very remote, and a lot of adaptation projects, because they are for a very limited time period. So there's not a lot of work that reaches across the whole Tala area or even the whole Shatkira area. And very limited localities participate, but when they do participate, they have, opportunities open up in terms of diversifying their livelihoods. They can get loans to start their micro businesses within their own areas. And also this helps them gain more public participation or increase their, citizenship participation, which will obviously have a better impact or better impact in terms of how they can then manage the climate crisis impacts on their lives and on their communities. Self-help here is in the sense that when they take up self-help strategies, they are not very beneficial in the long run. They give very short-term benefits, and it's mostly the kinds of tactics that they would have to use to either bypass social norms or to directly challenge social norms. So because caste issues, even if they have reduced a lot over the years, the kinds of byproducts or byproducts, in the sense that the kinds of inequities that persist don't really help them gain a lot of social mobility. So a lot of communities, you have people who share experiences of changing their surnames so that they don't appear to be Dalits in order to gain employment. You have people who directly don't want to involve themselves or negotiate with local government actors, and instead they will try and take up their own actions to help only their small localities out, but it has very limited long-term impact. Transformative strategies that happen is interesting in the case of caste-based discriminations, because the kinds of adaptation processes that these communities can take up will eventually become transformative. So, for example, if you have someone who's leading a petition to advocate for climate justice, or to advocate for the environmental harms that are happening in the Tala area, that will help their community become more mainstream. That'll help them create, kinds of social networks, which then impacts or greatly reduces the kinds of vulnerabilities they face, obviously, in the long run. But the kinds of responses that they take up also don't really show a lot of high levels of collective beliefs. You have individually people believing that they would be able to take, substantial control over their decision making. They have the ability to enact change. They feel motivated when they see others taking charge or leading or organizing collective action. But when it comes to actually taking collective action, it's very low. It's only, at least in my study, it's only 29% from these 4 communities out of 135, 29% of 135 people who participated in negotiating or participated in providing or giving formal petitions. You have more people doing non-institutional tactics, more people protesting, doing roadblocks, in order to have their voices heard and in order to challenge the environmental crisis that happens. But you see a very big distinction in that you have high levels of individual agency, but when it comes to collective beliefs, it's still very low. So I won't, due to time, I will not go in depth into the kinds of cases that I had here. But what I basically wanted to say that is that sense of agency both affects the kinds of adaptive approaches that they can carry out, and also is influenced by those the kinds of responses that they carry out. So if you have people who are involved already in NGO projects, who have a kind of network or relationship with influential figures in the community, they will exhibit higher personal agency. And that will, if other things are going well, if there are no other significant vulnerabilities, that will then help them mobilize collective agency. And in the kinds of process responses that they take, their collective agency also plays a critical role in not just tackling the kinds of climate crisis issues that they face, but also in mainstreaming their community, in the sense that it also tackles the kinds of caste-based discrimination that they continue to face. And while you have, as I said, you have like a higher sense of individual agency, it's mostly women who display that, which was an interesting finding. And it's also mostly women who take up those non-institutional approaches like protesting and roadblocking to tackle the kinds of environmental crises that happen around them. And while men also show a strong sense of personal agency, their ability to, their perceived ability to, change the outcomes of their actions or be able to collectively mobilize themselves was very low. And one interesting component of the study was, other than the kinds of responses that they take, physically, or like making strategic choices of who to network with and how, the kinds of shared memories that people create out of the suffering that happens, whether it's due to slow onset or sudden onset events, also helps them strengthen the collective belief or the collective efficacy they have of whether they'll be able to cope with climate change. So meaning making becomes very important when you're seeing how people's sense of agency shapes the kinds of responses that they can go on to form. And as a result of this, we can see that this understanding of internal motivations and self-efficacy might actually give us a lot more insight into the ways in which we can create more transformative processes, and also why and how and which communities would need more capacity building in terms of being able to enhance the kinds of locally led processes that we are envisioning. And all in all, that is the findings of my study I have. So if there's any questions, I'd love to answer them. So I think, should I answer the questions or should I?
Thank you, Ishratapa. We are overrunning the time, and Daniel will not be able to stay for longer. So I suggest answer one question. And
Yeah, I think there's
Daniel,
only one question there. To what is the
only
basis
one,
of?
and then you can take the other questions after Daniel finishes her
Yeah,
part.
so there's only one question, I think, that says, what is the basis of selecting the working area, I'm guessing. So
Yes, please go on.
yeah, so I think under the colloquial fellowship that we all did, we had already been, asked to look into like the southwest region of the country where the climate vulnerabilities exist. And the basis of selection for me is because I was working with Dalit communities. The Tala area had a higher number of communities I could access. And also it was facing significant kinds of climate vulnerabilities. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ishratapa. We have two more questions, but let's answer those towards the end of the session. Uh, now, let us move on to the next presentation. The next presentation will be next and final presentation. It will be by MD Shahadat Hussain. Sorry. By MD Shahadat Hussain. He is the founder and CEO of Oakridge Limited in Dhaka, Bangladesh. He's a civil engineer and climate change expert with expertise in water, environment, and climate change, including hydrological and hydraulic modeling. He's a former graduate of BUET and IUB Climate Change and Development. And then he has a rich background in water resources, engineering, and climate change. Currently, he serves as a water and sanitation expert in the Asian Development Bank, working on climate-related projects across Asia. And he has authored over 40 publications. So now he will discuss the climate change vulnerability and resilience of people living in the polar area of Khulna division and assessment of effectiveness of locally led adaptation. Shahadat bhai, the floor is yours. I will request you to finish by 10:17, 9:17 Dhaka time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, there is always introduced by Pad. Uh, Actually, the research work was done by the climate change vulnerability assessment by 4 folders and in Khulna division, which is decided by the local fellows, and the effectiveness of the local adaptation. So actually, this is the presentation outline, introduction, study, purpose, method, something like that. So introduction, I already noticed that there is a touched upon area and all we know that. So I'm just not increase the time during the introduction phase. So it is there is a folder area which is different parts of the 7x2 folder, 7x3, 7x11. So we already have lots of folders. Actually, you know that what is the polder is. Polder is the piece of low-lying land which is reclaimed by from the sea. It's a river protected by the embankment. So this is almost we have 177 polders by Bangladesh Water Development Board, but we choose the polder area in Khulna. So there is a this is a polder. This is a river uh, right, just left side of the river, and there is a drone video about this polder, so where we can see that the how the polder is, so where the polders are started and how the biodiversity and the effectiveness of these locally led adaptations and the protection of the polders, how they are managed their cyclone effective lands where there is a huge climate vulnerability is here. So actually, for the people where we selected the people which is vulnerability behind the polder, where they are not protected in various calamities like cyclones, sea level rise, then salinity intrusions, all these things are happens according to this. So this is my study area where we have collected the drone informations from the polders where the people are laying down and studies comes the findings from these areas where there is an that the polders is constructed in 1960 to 1970 where maximum polder is in vulnerable conditions according to the sea level rise, climate change, all are vulnerable for the crest level of this polder, and the vulnerability assessment, how they will come, they will lead, all these things are comes out from these objectives to find out the major damage inside the polder by using Copo tools. Like we collected almost 400 household data by using these Copo tools. Then to determine the inattention rate using the ArcGIS 8.5 by using the image analysis, which is free from Sentinel 1 and 2. to give the prediction and inundation maps by using fuzzy model, which is very interesting, like according to that 8.5 RCP. Then plot and analyze the flood damage curve according to the findings of these results. Then assessment how the effectiveness of this locally led adaptation can minimize their damage and the vulnerability into these boulders. So this is my study area. Like one folder is 10, 12, 7 by 1, 7 by 2, and all these things that comes out the damages, which is basically two types damage. One is tangibles, which is direct, and indirect and intangible. Direct and indirect category as comes to from like primary, like structures, agriculture, all these things. Secondary comes from the land and environmental recovery. And indirect failure is a business eruption like livelihood changes or something like that. And there is a secondary impact of the regional and national economy, and which is effect on the local level economy, as well as for the Upazila, Union Parishad and district level. All this economy are shaded by this damage and vulnerability assessment, and which comes from like water depth, flood water velocity, year of flooding, when there are vulnerability assessment during the flooding, all these things that comes out. And the methodology, I just have selected like two types of methodology, quality and quantitative. So qualitative data and quantitative data, all our observations are comes out from primary and secondary sources. So this is the methodology, like for the qualitative and quantitative data, all this data is comes from different sources, which is comes from Water Development Board, WARPO, and from the Ministry of Environment, DOE, and also the BMD. And the fuzzy logic developed by the MATLAB, then analyzes the data, then flood damage curves analysis comes out, then represent of the major damage due to the flood, like represent of the inundation of scenarios, and then how can they are measure of the adaptations procedures. So the methodology all are by COBO. All these surveys are worked on by household survey. Then this is the questionnaire, how the data is collected. So actually for the all the basic data, like for the CEDAR, ILA, and also some calamities like 2012, 2010, all these are comes out from this database. And from household data, there is also connected with the embankment, flood informations from the road infrastructure, human damages like social buildings, all these things are comes out. So from the data collection from the COBO, where another thing is from the DAM collections, digital elevation model development. Then this digital elevation model developed by for the inundation analysis for the different perspective predicted different area year. So which is the base year is 2030. Then after 10 years, what is happened and how the this affect the boulders. This is also measured. Then for the fuzzy logic, so we selected some portions like cropland, agricultural land, and rural settlement is to 1. Annual average rainfall is 2 and 3. All this comes out the summarized like the final fuzzy model. So this is the others. And for the data collections, all this data is come from the topography data, meteorological data, ground data, all these things that comes out. Then data analysis and field visit and collected the information from the field and gathered this information and kind of analysis and findings. Then what is the results comes out. So I'm just dropped out all this methodology because time is limited. So for like for the zero time, there is a 4 folders. So average damages of the houses is almost in 7 by 1, 7 by 2, 7, 10, 12, and 13, 14. This is all 4 folders. So the basically the 7 by 1 folder is basically higher in damages of houses. And crops damage also 69%, average fish damage is 63%. So all this comes out from the CEDAR. And also for the ILA, the comes out the damages. Then for the Ampan in 2016, how the damages comes out. And also this is the damage curve that in 2006 to 2020 for the damage percentage of 7 by 1 is reduced, and for the 7 by 2 is higher than the initial stage of the 7 by 2. So this is basically depends on the how the cyclone is moves on and how the vulnerability conditions and their improvement and their adaptation technology, all this comes out. Then also we connect with the RCP to 8.5. So how the mean sea level rises. So from RCP 8.5 in 2080 to 2021 and 30, there is an increment and 0.65 meter increase of the six assessment report according to the Bay of Bengal. So that is very vulnerable for these kinds of boulders. So why we need for 7/1 recommended crest elevation now is 4.8, and for 7/2 is 5, and 10/12 is 4.7, 13/12 is almost 4.9. So this is very important for the peak crest level, which is allowing for the subsidence, and the recommended elevations comes out from all this analysis is almost 4.8 to 6, which is very important for this vulnerability and adaptation procedure for these boulders people, which assessment future climate change, and also for the sustainable planning for water and disaster, global climate change into the temperature, rainfall, and over hydrological cycle. All these things are comes out for future climate change, water hazards, all these things is very important for this all four boulders. Also, we comes out another boulder which is nearby 39/1B, which crest level is more higher than this because this boulder is very vulnerable, which is near to the shore. So that's very important. So we also comes out these results and compare with them. And also for the inundation map, you saw that there is a folder 7/1 inundation map where there is in the year of 2001 almost for the inundation predictive is 7 meter. But if we cannot develop the crest level according to the level, then in 2080 or 2090, 15% of the inundation of this area will be inundated, and for 2100 is 25% of this area will be inundated. For another, for 77/2 polder, there is a inundations models run out, and if the predictive inundation when 6% meter, for the percentage inundation rate will be higher on these polders, but in 2030 to 80 is similar. But when there is an RCP jump up according to the climate change and increment of the temperature, it's very vulnerable for these polders because this 35% area will be covered and will be inundated. And similar kind of 10/12 folders also important for this is nearby Kulna. So this is also important for the inundations. All are comes out for these areas. And for 13/12 to 14/2, it's also 7 meters, the crest level, which will predicted that the crest level will be increment. And that's why it's very important for increment of these credit levels. So how the predicts of the folders percentage comes out in 2030, all the damages like for the all the folders, like the damage rate is very high for the folders 7/2 in 2030, and in 2040 is similar. So all these things has comes out that this is very similar kind of importance, and for the four folders 7/2 is very vulnerable conditions. So this is all the agricultures like variables we comes out for the fuzzy model like cropland, agriculture, rural settlement, annual average rainfall, all these changes which comes out. And also for fuzzy model, there is an development of the inundations models with the vulnerability conditions which comes up. So actually how we can adapt this technology like for this is the vulnerability conditions and very vulnerable according to these four folders, 7/2 is very vulnerable. We recommended some locally adaptation practices which can very much efficiently for this vulnerability condition of these folders. Like traditional community consultations can include, and community-based and participatory approach can include in these locally led adaptations, and locally led participation like local organization, local NGOs, local government, small business persons, all these comes and cope up with these technologies of these locally led adaptations funding is managed by the local actors, like the local government, and as well as for the union level and Purashabha level will come out, and they can give some subsidies for these people, which is can come by some deforestations, and also for the dark mountains, and for the people who are locally spreading their adaptation resilience and actions of this 7x2 polders. So actually in the report, the detail will come out, and this report already we are trying to submit in a journal. So where it comes out like that, the adaptation planning comes out follow up this top-down approach, like adaptation planning of the people from National Adaptation Plan. UNFCS guided the initiative, and then comes out for the NAPA. Then it will be initiative national level, like the National Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan can be included. Then take a long development plan, like national development for 5 year long. Then Upajala level development or adaptation resilience and community resilience will be connected. This is very important for adaptation planning by the people. So that's why follow up the bottom up approach, which is very effective, and for the regular monitoring and for the vulnerability assessment, then people's and the awareness of these people is very important for this, and connectivity of the local people, which is very vulnerability conditions, then connected with the Upajala Parishad, the union chairmen or the local members can implement these issues with this, and this is very important for connecting all these things by regular monitoring and maintenance work by third party. This is can be done by the third party, different consultancy firms or NGOs can help them to that the locally led adaptation is implemented, and this monitor also for long time, not a short time, just like minimum 5 years to 10 years plan, then that will be very helpful for them. So for locally led adaptation, actually it comes out that raise of the homes for the flood levels of the polder 10-12, raise of the home from 7x2, all this comes out some protection of the embankment, and also some polder road which need to be waste management or pit or something like that, which is outside of the polder, they are very vulnerable, but they are not vulnerability for the waterlogging. The inside of the polder, they are very vulnerable for the waterlogging problems. So that's why proper ponding systems and water supply sources and for the energy sources very important for these issues. So that's why locally led adoption practices and the technology resilience, all these implemented in a locally led government authorities, that will be very helpful for developing these polder areas and livelihood of these polders. And also some technology already implemented, we visited, like afforestation, sorting vegetables, which is very much less, but it will help the people to adopt these technologies. And this is initiative by the local level or government or something like local government, that is very helpful for the local people, which can be very much efficient for this vulnerability condition. So actually for the last thing, for the conclusion of my research, the coastal polder is surrounding by embankment, but this crest level need to be increased according to the climate change or something like that. For the flood inundation have predicted upcoming 2030, 50 or 2021. And for the group discussion, we are identified that major challenges and barriers are for to develop the increment of the connection of the locally led leaders, which is very much important for connecting with the local people, which is very critical consideration, like construction and maintenance, the infrastructure like for the embankments, polders or sluice gate, that is very vulnerable for different calamities. So that's why it's a real-time monitoring can be implemented, and real-time monitoring system need to be implemented for developing these people, which is inundated by cyclone or tidal surge. And some recommendations comes out like for the sheep farming to reduce the tidal surge effect, housing structure should be limited in the elevated places based on the analysis of this approximated damage rate need to be can be known, and it will be very necessary step for the concerned authority. And also locally led practices can be strengthened, like farmers cooperative, some trade unions, clubs, or business associates. A small businessman can be led this regarding the climate vulnerability people, then can it is very helpful for them. Also we can appear for the youth leading organization, which is very important for reduce the mobilization and project implementation bar, which is local people can be implemented this project, which is monitored by the government or local leaders. So very various references come out. So which is details in the my reports. This is actually from my presentation. So if you have any questions or any recommendation, then you can discuss with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Shahzad Bhai, for the comprehensive presentation. We will take questions for your presentation after Daniel's part because she has to leave. So everyone, as we near the end of our session, let me introduce Dr. Daniel Falzon, Assistant Professor of Sociology at Rutgers University and a long-standing friend of ECAD, with her PhD from Brown University, which focused on climate change adaptation in Bangladesh. She has extensively worked in the coastal region of the country. Her expertise will undoubtedly enrich our understanding on the insights that have been shared today. Daniel, over to you.
Thanks so much, Fahad. And I really appreciate everyone keeping to time because unfortunately it is like the middle of the day here and I have to go teach class, so I can't stay for longer. But I truly enjoyed these three presentations. I learned so much, and it's great to see how as this narrative and this kind of like priority toward locally led adaptation has become, I guess, more of a dominant discourse in adaptation circles and in projects that are being implemented in this region. It's great to see what's actually happening on the ground and hear about it from a researcher's perspective to see like to what extent locally led adaptation is becoming something that's fundamentally changing how we do adaptation, or is it something that sort of still has a lot of gaps? And I think we saw both in all of your presentations, both the good parts of locally led adaptation that where we see potential, and also the shortcomings in the places where there still needs to be a lot of work. So yeah, I was so impressed by all of these studies. Just to give brief comments on each one. I mean, again, I'll say overall, I think you really painted a really excellent detailed picture of the complexity of the local landscape and why when we have top-down adaptation initiatives, they simply don't work in the local context. They often miss these complexities by oversimplifying what the local landscape looks like and oversimplifying what's needed to adapt communities to adaptation. And when you actually get at this local level, you get this kind of local or this insight about the local level that you all have shown in your research. That's when you can kind of start to see where or how things need to be made more locally specific and why those initiatives are likely to be more successful in the long run for adaptation effectiveness. So Manjurul Islam's presentation on the state of locally led adaptation in these three upazilas that you studied, I thought that was so interesting. It was really it was interesting. At first, I loved the framework you presented at the end, but it was great to see also that you developed the indicators, the 9 indicators to gauge local engagement with projects kind of at all of these different levels of the project, I guess, project cycle and planning, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, et cetera. I thought that was really interesting, and I was interested to see that the NGO initiatives rated higher than the government projects. I wasn't necessarily surprised because locally led adaptation has been it's been taken up so well, I guess, by NGO communities in terms of like their enthusiasm for it. But I do wonder from your findings, to what extent these NGOs that are sort of checking the boxes for locally led adaptation are actually giving, I don't like the word giving, but like are actually ceding, I guess, their own authority over the projects and giving local people the opportunity to actually lead on the project. So it's clear that they're checking the boxes of having local people get involved in planning, checking in with them throughout the project cycle, et cetera. But I'm curious if you think that they actually the local people actually have a lot of control over the project in the end, and if that's fundamentally changing how adaptation projects are taking place, especially for the NGO projects. I think I'll pause there, because this kind of gets to the idea of agency, which Israt Jahan, you really broke down the idea of agency really clearly, and I enjoyed how your focus on that, especially I'm a sociologist, so we love talking about agency. So I was really interested to see your focus on Dalit communities, because I feel like that's certainly something that goes under researched, the specific circumstances of Dalit communities with all of the various levels of marginalization and additional social challenges that they face in adaptation. I guess I was wondering, so I loved your breakdown of like the different coping strategies, the adaptations, the NGO, or the self-help strategies. On adaptation, you kind of discussed the interaction with NGOs and how that ultimately seemed to increase their agency. I believe that's sort of a broad generalization of your findings, but I'm curious if you could like say a little bit more about that, or I'd be curious to know if how interaction with NGOs, maybe access to resources or whatever it is, increased people's agency, and were there ways that it limited people's agency as well? Because the way you described the community members, it sounds like they have a lot of agency just on their own. And so I'm curious, is interaction with outsiders sort of like enhancing the existing agency that people have to advocate for their own needs and their own special circumstances? I'm also curious, you mentioned that so you laid out the transformative solutions or potential transformative solutions. It sounded like from what you said that these were sort of ideal, like ideally they would be able to take up these more transformative solutions, but that people were engaging in activities like roadblocks you mentioned, for example, that kind of were collective action, moments of collective action. And I'm curious how effective those things were, or like what were the specific goals? Like, is there, it sounds like there's more collective action needed, or you see the potential for more collective action within these communities. And I'm curious if there is kind of the infrastructures for internal organizing. Do you see those like coming out, or do you see opportunities for people to kind of organize themselves in a more, I guess, like long-term planning way? Because you mentioned these like short-term mechanisms for like self-help and for taking action. So I'm wondering if you see that potential, and you kind of laid at the end a little bit what it would take for people to take these collective actions in a more transformative way, but I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about it. And then last, on Shahzad Hussain, I really enjoyed your presentation on the polders. I don't have a background in engineering or anything myself, so it was really, you had some compelling maps and figures there that really showed the vulnerability of the polder region, and those were just, I mean, very compelling visuals and really interesting information on the, I guess, I don't know, we view infrastructures like the polders as potentially a tool for resilience, but we can see in your presentation how they can also become a huge source of vulnerability if they're not maintained, and if they're not adapted to withstand the projected impacts of climate change, as you outlined. So I guess I'm curious most in your presentation about, you kind of laid out at the end the problem that right now local people don't have a lot of agency, a lot of control over how polder resilience and repairs and adaptations take place. You laid out the sort of top-down planning that exists. I liked your distinction between adaptation for the people versus adaptation planning by the people. And I guess, especially thinking about what the other two presenters demonstrated in their work, I'd be curious to hear how you think it's possible, like what would be necessary for this adaptation planning for the people, or excuse me, by the people, to actually be taken up. in terms of actually getting control over I guess like control over the polder system in some way, right? So like actually taking being able to like take on that decision making that determines how it will all be maintained and adapted going forward. I think I need to wrap up, so I'm gonna kind of cut myself off there. I really enjoyed all of your presentations. I'd love to hear more about your project and to see the theses that informed these presentations. And I'll stay on for a few more minutes. If I don't know if any of you have time to respond, but I'd love to hear more about your work generally. So congratulations to all of you on some excellent presentations and excellent research.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for your valuable feedback on their works. I'm sure that will help them a lot in honing in their research, and if they plan to publish in a peer-reviewed journal in the future. If there are any questions to the last two presenters, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. I don't see any hands or questions in the chat box. So I'm taking it that there are no further questions or comments. Still, if you have anything to ask or discuss with the presenters, please feel free to get in touch with them. Munjur Bhai, Shahadat Bhai, and Vishwadapa, please put your email addresses in the chat box so that if anyone is interested in taking the discussion with you in the future, they can get in touch with you. And thank you again, everyone. Probably we should take a screenshot of the session. So I'd request everyone to turn on your videos if that's possible. Let's give it another try.